Hi everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to speak to the diocese and say a couple of things. We're in very unusual and I think it's fair to say extraordinary times. The good news is we continue to be in the best place possible. We're in the Lord's hands. He continues to be on the throne, and even in the midst of great uncertainty and unknowns, we can have confidence in Him, confidence in the future that's ours. Um, but we are in a strange time, and so I thought I'd take this opportunity to share with the diocese where we're at, how we've got here, what we're hoping some of the recent decisions can achieve, and perhaps even a little bit about what the future may hold. So I thought I'd take this chance to explain a few things. Last week I wrote to the clergy and leaders of the diocese to give a little bit of advice over the COVID-19 situation. It was fairly general advice and it wasn't very directive. It was more feeling that because each of our churches are in slightly different situations, because each of our ministries are slightly different, I didn't want to be too directive in terms of what we do. Some general advice and then work out how best to express that in the local situation and context. But now I've changed my mind, and as you probably know by the reason you're watching this, we've been a little more directive now as a diocese in terms of our response. And I'd like to explain why that change has happened, why I think this is the best thing for us to do at this time, and why I hope that God will use it to bring glory to His name and be us to be a blessing to God's people in our different communities. There have really been three reasons why I've changed in my thinking over the last week. The first reason is just the ever-changing context that we find ourselves in. It was a week ago exactly that I met with the wardens of St Stephen's Church for us to talk a little bit about what we might do at St Stephen's in the current context. And there were things discussed that night which I wouldn't even believe I'd ever countenance. And only a few days later I was going, they are real and live possibilities because everything's changing so quickly. And one of the things that's important in a changing context where the change itself can be destabilising and make people feel like they're spinning out of control, sometimes the way to counter that is to make definitive decisions, which bring stability and certainty. So the changing context was one reason. The second reason was on Tuesday I was in Wellington for the National Church Leaders meeting. And that meeting was timely because it meant that the heads of each of the denominations, we got a chance around the table to talk about where we were in this situation, what people and denominations were doing or not doing, what the plans were, and it was very helpful for me in my thinking and prayer and over the situation. The third one was that over the last 48 hours, many of the Anglican dioceses in Australia have made decisions that they are immediately halting all gatherings within their diocese. So the Diocese of Tasmania, Sydney, Canberra, Goulburn, Newcastle, you could go on and on, have all made similar decisions within a similar time period. I took that opportunity to therefore ring one of the bishops in Sydney, Bishop Gary Koo, who's heading up the COVID-19 task force in that diocese. He was a medical doctor before he went into ministry, and so I spent some time on Wednesday night chatting with him about what they've done in Sydney, why, the way they've done it, those kind of things. Because of those three factors, as I've weighed things up, prayed about it, chatted to the clergy of the diocese and standing committee of the diocese, it's become very clear that we need to make a definitive decision. And the definitive decision, I think, needs to be that we can't gather as we have done. We can't operate as churches as we've done up until this point. In particular, that means we can't have public meetings where anyone can be coming in and we increase risks and can't control things. We can't have meetings in public buildings where, again, those controls are really difficult. And we certainly can't have large numbers. I'm very reluctant to put a cap on numbers. Some of our Australian brothers and sisters have put no more meetings of no more than 10, and that seems to me to be almost overly restrictive at the moment. But in my mind, there's been residential ministry, i.e. we're doing things in people's houses, which almost straight away safeguards us in terms of the risks of people coming in uninvited, and it necessarily reduces the numbers that are possible. Rather than the Pharisee kind of mindset, how many can I get before I've broken a rule? I'd invite us to not think in those ways. Residential ministry. In the diocesan letter that I've put out today, I've said that there's still the possibility to gather for this Sunday, that churches may choose to meet and gather as normally, as long as they're obeying the government's regulations in terms of 100 people, for one more Sunday, so that face to face we can pray and talk and minister. Many churches will not choose to do that because they want to take things seriously, but there is permission to do it for this weekend only. But starting Monday, none of those gatherings happening in that way. I hope that's clear. Now, I'd like to say a little bit more on what I think and hope this will do. So I think we're in a situation now where we've needed to make a united decision to stop things. I think that's the socially responsible thing for us to do as we seek to love God's people in the different situations that we are. I hope that it will take pressure off the individual churches trying to wonder about when we do something, what we do. We're taking those decisions into our own hands and just having to deal with the consequences of the decision. And I'm hoping that it will bring unity amongst the diocese. I'm not someone who's for consistency just for consistency's sake, so we all have to do the same thing at the same time regardless of other things, but sometimes doing consistent things brings unity. When we know that at St Stephen's, as we're facing this difficult situation, that our brothers and sisters up at Mania are also doing the same thing, there's something that brings us together in that. We will also, because we'll all be doing it at the same time, we will be asking the same questions, wrestling with the same issues, coming up with solutions, and we'll be able to resource together and be an encouragement and a support to one another in that way. So I hope that there will be real benefit in us doing this as a family of churches all at the same time. So I hope that's explained a little bit about the context and why I think we've had to do what we're doing. Let me explain what it is we're doing and what we're not doing. Firstly, we're not cancelling church. I think that's really important to say because we're in a very strange context at the moment where many things in our normal lives are being cancelled. We're not cancelling church. I want to say that because the context we find ourselves in, because of the COVID virus, people are talking about quarantine, people are talking about self-isolation, people are talking about social distancing, and the danger of that is isolation. Think of the Tower of Babel. When God wanted to cause problems, what he did was segregate, change communication, break up fellowships, all that sort of thing. No, we know as the people of God that gathering is part of who we are and is vital to our well-being. We know that fellowship is vital to our well-being. So there's no way we're cancelling church. What we're doing is we're intentionally and deliberately seeking to gather and to do fellowship in a different way. We think that's the right thing to do in this current context. That means not meeting in public buildings anymore, not open meetings where we can't have control in a socially responsible way of who's coming and who will be there, and certainly not meeting in large groups as we've been advised and indeed instructed by our government. So we will carry on doing the gathering and the fellowship, but in radically different ways. We will now no longer be able to do our Sunday services the way they were. But I'm very hopeful that we will gather in smaller, private, home group church ways. And those will be where we encourage one another, where we bless one another, where we challenge one another, where we pray for one another. And we want to do all that we can as a diocese to resource and encourage and support each of us as we work out how best to do that in our local communities. So I hope that's been clear about what we're not cancelling church. We're going to intentionally and deliberately gather together and fellowship together in a different way. And we'll be in touch with different resources that we can provide for the churches and see how we can support the leadership and all those sorts of things. I think it's also important to remember that the opportunities that this presents, I in no way want to try and pretend that this is a great new stage which is just joyful, and this is a hard stage. There's going to be so much sadness and disappointment in not being able to gather as we once did, in the way that we did. I think it's going to be for a time. I don't think this carries on forever, but we've got to be realistic about that. There is loss and sadness and disappointment. But there's not just that. There's also opportunities. I think that this particular time in our nation's history, in our world's kind of history, immense opportunities for evangelism. As people in our communities have their lives disrupted as they think nothing's the same, as they wonder what they can hold on to when everything seems to be spinning out, people will ask more questions about what life's about. Perhaps what the meaning of life is, what happens after death. It's in these kind of contexts that the good news of Jesus holds the answers. That the truth that you and I know, we can share with others, and pray that the Lord would use it to open eyes, to change hearts, and to bring people from darkness to light. So I think there will be enormous opportunities for evangelism. I also think there will be enormous opportunities for pastoral care. We've had the luxury of being able to gather and do things. We no longer have that luxury. That will mean we'll have to be more intentional and deliberate and proactive about how we look after each other. And I hope it will bring stronger church groups, a stronger diocese, a stronger body of Christ, so that we may have a better witness in the world. So let's make the most of those opportunities that are there. I think therefore in this space there's going to be a number of questions that we've got, and we're learning as we go. We're trying to work out what this new normal will be, how best to do it. We will make mistakes. I pray that we will be patient with each other, forbearing with each other, forgiving when we make things more difficult for each other or where we lack thoughtfulness or communication well. But we as a diocese will be trying to do all we can to equip and resource the churches to do ministry in a new way. Remembering, of course, that it's the unchanging gospel that we preach and proclaim. It's the same principles that are there. We want to honour God and love people as best we can. And remembering we're in the best place, we're in God's hands, we're His people, which gives us enormous confidence as we face these difficult times. And we're continuing on with His work, albeit in a different context. My thoughts and prayers are with all of us. Please get in contact with us if there's any questions or worries, and we'll keep trying to communicate regularly and effectively throughout the diocese as we learn and deal with this new situation together. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you.